Today we're going to talk about mastering masks. I also have another title that could work for today's presentation to how to filter data in DataGraph. The terminology of masks in DataGraph is something that really comes more from a image processing perspective, that if you're looking to hide particular aspects of an image on a graph or a figure, then masking is a term that's used, for example, in Photoshop. Data masking is also a very specific term that's used for obscuring data, and that's not what we're talking about here. In terms of data, you would think of this as a filtering type of action. But again, masking is the term we use because this really comes from the idea of trying to hide data from a particular graph. So we have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Masks are a really powerful way within DataGraph to be able to customize what your graph looks like. And the overall purpose of having a mask is to allow us to select a subset of data without having to modify the underlying data set. And this is something that is really key within DataGraph because we encourage you to not do a lot of data preparation when you're bringing data into DataGraph. If you think about when you're making a graph in a spreadsheet, for example, then you have to do a lot of work potentially to get that data, the exact data you want to be in that graphic in a table. Here in DataGraph, because we have these filtering actions or masking options, you're not as obligated to do that work. And in fact, you'll save yourself a lot of time if you can just bring your entire data set into DataGraph. DataGraph also works with very big data sets. So again, here's just an overall purpose of why what we're hoping to do with masks. And if you think about this also more broadly, the idea is to have a very data-driven approach rather than, I always go back, I guess, to the spreadsheet example, but rather than having to select a section of cells that you're going to put in a graph here, masks are used to allow you to have a set of data that is being compared to a criteria that you're deciding what you want to include within your graphic. So what you see here on the screen, this is just a very simple way of thinking about how these masks work, that you have a particular set of data that you want to look at, you have another set of data that you're comparing to, and these can be the same. They don't have to be different sets of data, and they're compared to some criteria. There are also various operators that we use to make those comparisons. So for example, for text data, the first line here is referring to what a mask might look like for text data, where if you want to pick data from a particular country that matches a country name, we actually use the term match. You'll see that in the examples that follow. If you're using numeric data, and you have a column of numbers that show the year, then we can just use the mathematical equal symbol to specify a particular year. Dates also can be used within masks, and this is specifically referring to when you have a date column type. Last week, the webinar that we did, we talked about data types, and we posted that actually online on YouTube yesterday. In some way, that's a good primer for what a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. And the date here is then compared to a formatted string that shows you the year, the month, and the day. And this is the format within DataGraph that you would enter a date that you might want to compare to. In the example here, just saying we want to see all this data where the date is greater than or equal to January 1st, 2020. There are 3 different masking options that we're going to talk about today. We have a functionality that's actually somewhat more recent in DataGraph, the first one we're going to talk about, which is creating a mask column. We're also then going to talk about masking it within a drawing command. This has been in DataGraph for a long time. That allows you, again, just to hide particular data from view within a graphic. And then we also have the ability to mask within groups of drawing commands. So we're going to illustrate each of these today. First of all, the mask column. The input here can either be a number or a text, and you're able to apply a single criteria. The mask column is not as flexible in terms of the variety of options that you can do within the mask itself, within the command, but this still has a lot of utility, and we found some good use cases for this already. This was added, maybe this is about a year ago, if you have not used this yet. But it returns the actual values in the column in an additional column. This is a derived column type. It can be useful for limiting the labels that you want to add within a graph, and also for limiting the values of other columns dynamically. Here on the right-hand side, you see an actual screenshot of what the mask column looks like, where we have the input. If you wanted to have it return population data, we would mask with a country, and where again there's a condition that this could be text, and we could type in the text string. Here you can see kind of the flow again of how does this work. We have input data, we have a data column, these go into the mask column, and then we get out of that a subset of data. Here's 3 different examples that could run through those logical cases that we saw before, where again the condition that we use, the operator that we use to compare, is going to change depending on whether we have text or whether we have numbers, because obviously they're different data types. So this is again a place where data types comes into play, where this condition menu that you see will be different in terms of the options available depending on which ones you pick. And I think, yeah, here, so let me do this slide, and then I think we'll get into the examples for this one. So the point of this is just to note that the criteria that we specify, we're going to talk about how this can be either a value that we type in, as in this last slide here, you can see that in each of these there's a value field, and we've typed in text, here we've typed in a year, and here we've typed in a date string. But we could also use variables for these, and this is particularly where DataGraph can do some really interesting things. When you start to combine these statements with variables, we can do animations, we can do click actions, and we'll show some examples of those in this webinar. Several of the examples that I'm going to use today do come from the online examples. If you go into DataGraph and open up the online examples, search on the word mask, you'll see a number of different files that use masks in various ways. Again, some of these examples come from there. The first one, though, that I'm going to bring up, well, actually, this one does come from, here we go. This is one of the ones on the online examples. So here we have a simple file, and what I want to do is illustrate, first of all, how the mask works within the data table itself. Here we have a character, a text column of type, we have an X column and a Y column. And to create the mask column itself, I would go to the other drop-down menu, select mask, and then you can see that this object has been added to my list. My input, I do need to specify whether the input is a numerical value or a text value. This gets back to, again, what I talked about in that last webinar, where the different data types, how even for characters, you can encode those with numerical values to go along with them. Here we just need to specify what data type we're using. And so for this instance, I'm going to use a text column. Here's my value for type. That's going to be my, oh, actually, I take this back. My input is what I want to return. So I want to return the Y value, and this is my numerical value. I'm going to mask with the type, and the condition menu here is going to be dependent on the fact that the type column is a text column. And now I need to specify, well, what is the text that you want to base this on? So if my correct criteria is A, then I'm just going to see the values in my column where type is A. If I change this to B, I'm just going to see the values where that's B. And I can go ahead and we'll just give this this is Y mask. And if I use this now in a graphic where I'm going to plot X versus Y mask, plot these points, then you can see how I am only plotting those values. So what DataGraph will do by default is ignore anywhere where you have a blank value within a row. If I change this to A, then it's going to go ahead and change the data that's being used within that command. So again, this is a little different than if you're used to using the masks in the command. This mask column gives you a way to specify that. I guess I just want to show you that if I do change what I'm masking with, so notice here the condition can be is text or in set. If I change this to a different column, if I want to mask on X for some reason, then this menu is going to change to show me operators that work with numerical values. I can go ahead and change this to not equal to 1, for example, and it's going to show me those points. Just to confirm, we could go ahead and you could label these values. If I go ahead and then change my operator, well, you can also see that the data has changed. So, different conditions depending on whether it's text or whether it's numerical values. The last thing to show you here that we talked about was the fact that these can be based on variables. And actually the examples that are within this file use that approach where we're actually not using a masked column, but the data is being masked on a variable. Here we have all the data being plotted within a graph, and then we have type A and type B. I'll go ahead and actually just continue to, because I want to show that with the masks within the commands themselves. But if I take the mask column that I've set here, I could use but there's a bunch of different variables that I could use to mask on this. I could just use a value. So I'm going to add an object where I have a number that I'm going to mask on, and I could make this, let's see, a number that's actually in there, number 5. And if I change this now to that variable, so now the value is coming from this variable that I've set up, and every time I change the variable, I'm going to see my data change, and my plot also is going to change as a result of that. Again, I can change my conditions. What you can also do is you can use sliders are another interesting way to create masks. In this case, I could click on this button to create a slider. I want this to be an integer, and I might have this going from 1 to 5, for example. And if I make this I can just delete the old variable, have my new variable for number, and now as I change this, you're going to see how my graph is changing. The other type of mask that we can do is we can use various text variables to be able to mask our data. I'm going to mask with type, and my type is going to be, it's text, and I'm going to change this to be select type. And now it's based on the variable that I set up here. So I can go ahead and change whether I have a text value of A or B, and you can see how that changes there. What I want to show you is that there's also this condition for using a set variable. I'm going to change this to inset, and this is a particular type of global variable that uses characters. I can go ahead and then use this menu to say create text set from column. It creates the new variable, and you see within this there's actually a checkbox for whether I'm plotting A or I'm plotting B. And to make this a little bit clearer, I can also use the color scheme, which is the same thing that was done in these other graphs, we can go ahead and change the fill color from being uniform to be based on the type. And here you could create a new color scheme. I'll just use the one that's already in this graph. So now you can see how this variable is used to select what data I'm seeing on my graph, and I can toggle between the two. The text set is an interesting variable type because it has a list of that's dynamically generated from the column itself. So if I want to, if I have a column that has a lot of different categorical values, I can put this within my text set, and the program will automatically pick up every unique value and put them in this checklist for us. Okay, I'm just checking on, there were some questions on the chat. It looks like those have been answered, so I'll go ahead and continue with our presentation. So that gives you a simple example of how the masking options work within the mask column. Let's go ahead now and talk a little bit more about how masks work within commands. And within a command, we can mask individual commands, have a single mask within that command itself. We can apply one or more criteria. This is different than the masking within the table where you have one criteria applied to that one column. Here we'll be able to apply multiple criteria. We can also copy masks between commands. So once you create these once, you don't have to create them over and over again. And we can also extract masks to a data column itself so that we can use those masks in other ways. And that's kind of another interesting use of the masks that's within the columns themselves. Sorry, the commands. Here's a graphic that helps to illustrate how masks within commands work, and that these have more options, again, than the mask in a column. We have our input data, we have our data column that we're going to use as a criteria, we have a drawing command that we're going to apply that mask into, and there's some graphical output of that drawing command. We also have this option of outputting a column that is used for that mask that gives us a Boolean column type. Basically, it will output a 0 or a 1 depending on whether a particular row in a column was included within the mask, and then that can be used within other commands to do other things within DataGraph. And here we have the masks within our commands. They can be specified, they can be variables, but they can also come from columns. Again, more options and a lot of different ways that you can use these. So the criteria for text, for example, we can enter text directly. We can compare text to a column, whether it's found in a column or not found in a column, but we can also compare to a specific variable. So let's go ahead and go back to DataGraph and show you an example of some of these. Okay, here we go. Here's a file that I already worked on a bit that has, oops, sorry about that. Bring that back. This file has country population data and is a file that I downloaded from the World Bank. You can see that there's country name here, country code. There's a column here for continent that I mapped in. I can show you how I did that. And then we have a value for population, and there's also a mask value here. So there's a column where I already set up a column mask. Show you this on the left-hand side. So this is similar to what we showed before. Here I have the input value. Here is the population. I have the country name is what I'm using to mask. The condition is text, and I've just specified that the country here is Iceland. So this is a simple column mask that I created. And then I used that in order to create this graphic. So actually, let me just show you quickly how I would create this, because there is one trick here in case you haven't done this before, in terms of when you have these very long data sets and you want to do a line graph off of a particular set of data. You can see here how the way that this mask works. In this particular column, I'm only seeing the data for Iceland. And if I wanted to plot the year versus the mask value, and I click a line graph, initially you're not seeing anything, because the way that the plot command works is it's connecting X and Y locations that are contiguous in terms of the data table itself. When you have data that's separated like this, there is an option within the command to bridge gaps within the data, and that's how you get this line of where the data is coming from just that mask value column. But what I want to do here is I want to move to the more complicated example of using the mask for using a mask that is within my drawing command itself. And so here I've expanded the plot command. There's by default, it will just say draw all. But if I want this to be based on my country name, then I can use the menu, or I could go ahead and drag the country name over here, drop it, and then I get this other these other menus that appear that give me logical operators that I can choose from. This is a little different than the mask column, because here we're showing you everything, and it's up to you to pick what the appropriate mask is depending on the column that you have selected. For this one, I'm going to say I want the country name to match a particular country. By default, it's using a logical operator where it's just showing the star to denote it's a wildcard character that basically allows everything to be drawn. But I'm going to type in Iceland, and then I get my line back. So equivalent to what we did with the mask column, I can see I have this one column that's shown there. What I want to show you is how you can copy and paste these masks. So if I started with a points command by doing the same thing where I have category and I have value, and I typed it, or I click the points command option, now I get points for all of these countries, but I only want to see Iceland in this command as well. Then if I go into the gear menu, I actually could have used in points command, but I want to specifically show you how these masks can be copied. So if I go here to the gear menu and say copy mask, then I go to the gear menu of my points command and I say paste mask. Now I have the same mask within both commands, and I will open this up just to illustrate that mask is shown there. We can also include the masks that are in our in our commands can be coming from variables. So I don't have to just say country name here is Iceland and kind of manually have to type in each one. I could use the text set, for example. So if I go under this menu, you'll notice that there's a number of other options here. So if I say in set, so select that, and you get this new options here. I'll say create text set from column, and then I get by automatically the column that you see here is just called match. But I could say this would be a country where I can go ahead and click this to uncheck all the countries, but I could go ahead and just click this particular button to be able to select what country I want to see. And in this case, since this really works better actually also with individual countries at once, another option is to use the text is option that will also create a variable, create a text menu, where in this case, I can, if I want to do this, we'll just call this 1 for selecting one country at a time, and I could go ahead and select which country I wanted there. And I can have I could create multiple of these, for example, too. I could take my text set, I'm going to hold the Option key, make a copy of this. I could have 1 and 2. So here's 2 different countries. We can go ahead and go into this one, say inset, and choose the, not inset, it's in text is, choose 2, and then from here I can go ahead and change which 2 countries I'm seeing on my screen. And it probably makes sense for my Y scale here actually to be in a logarithmic so that we could see both of those lines together. Okay, so let me go back to the list that I had here to see. So we talked about using text. I guess I didn't specifically show you that how we can do match or not a match, but if you look at when we're using text within these, if I'm just typing in the text that I want, then these are the 2 options down below, where match is just allowing you to type in a string, and not a match would be the negative of that, where it would show you everything but that particular string that you typed in. And we talked about comparing to a variable, both the text is variable and the inset variable. What we did not talk about is this one here, where it's found in a column or not found in a column. So let me go ahead and go over that one. And so, for example, I could create a column. Say these are this is a country column that I'm going to make new, and I can go ahead and, for example, we'll type in a couple of different countries. And then in my graphics, and actually I think I will use this with a points command, since that's makes a little more sense for this data. So if I go ahead and create a new plot of this data where I have my year and I have my value, I'm going to go ahead and put all my countries here. But if I only want to see the ones that are listed in this column, then I can use that also as a mask. So I would say draw all of these countries where the country name is found in the column country. So now I only have these 2 columns being shown. This can be, again, another really handy way to be able to mask data that I can set up these particular columns that would then allow me to specify exactly what I wanted to be included within my drawing command that you see there. And here I could also do, I can use color schemes, and there's a bunch of other ways to do this, but for now we'll just leave that there and keep going with the rest. So there's the found in and there's the not found in. So those are the criteria and the various ways that you can do masks for text. We also have a variety of wildcards that work. You can use an asterisk to denote match any character. There's also the ability to use a question mark where you want to have one particular character that you see. You can also use brackets to be able to differentiate different ranges of values. So say, for example, for some reason in this graph, I had a mask I wanted to create where I wanted the country name to match all countries that began with A, for example. Then I could use my bracket or we could actually even say A to B. So these would be B countries. So that would specify that the first letter should be A, and then I can combine that with a wildcard to be able to see all of these, what these countries are. And one, I guess, a handy thing to do would be we could also add labels at each of these points. Since we're focusing on the math, I don't want to get too distracted by going into that. But one of the things that what I did want to show you was how we could extract a column as a mask too. So if you wanted to just confirm that this mask is working correctly, go into the gear menu, say extract as column, and now what you'll see is that I have a mask column that is showing me a 1 for everywhere where the criteria was met, and a 0 where it was not met. So for all these countries where the names of the countries didn't begin with A or B, these are all going to be zeros. And again, I combined that with the asterisk to mean that any number of characters could follow that. So when you combine all of these, you can combine these wildcards in a variety of different ways, and that will give you a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of being able to filter data and sift through data in a variety of ways. Now let's talk about numerical values and how we can mask on numbers. There's a number of different ways that we can do this. The first one that you see here is to compare to a specific range of values. We can compare to a value or a variable, and we can also include logical expressions. Here's a data set that this example is online in our online examples. This is one that was a result of a question that someone had asked: how do I plot only particular increments of values? So this is a data set where we have some 261 values for each of these two columns. And if you only wanted to have a point shown intermittently, because if I showed a point everywhere, that it might be just too many points being shown, then we used a mask to be able to achieve this, the look of this graph. And in fact, we're also using a slider here. So let me show you. If I change this slider, here's where you see every point being plotted. And now you see less and less points being plotted, where I'm showing how I skipped that. And the way that this is being done is by using a logical statement. And actually for this one, I am also doing this at the group level. So if I wanted to do this just for, I'll just start by showing you how I would do this for one column. So I want to plot this one column of data, and I'm going to plot it where the x-axis is actually the row number. I highlight the row number, I can highlight my column, I can click on a plot command, and I see all of my data. I want to also use this in a points command. Now I see the points on top of that. Again, it's more points that I want to see. And so if I go into here, then I can use as mask, and let's see, I'm doing this with T1. So I guess just quickly to make sure you also see the other ways that numbers can be used, I could just say, where that is equal to, let's say 22, T1, oh, not T1 equal to 22, sorry, number column. So I'm using the row counter is equal to 22, and there you can see that individual point. So I could highlight one particular point on my graph. But what I want to do here again is this intermittent view. So the way that I'm going to do that is using one of these logical statements. And this is something that is, again, it's a very powerful option within this, where you can really specify some interesting things. If you've never used this before, when you initially select the logical, it gives you an expression where it's using the character V to represent the column that you've picked here. So this is saying for that particular column, show me everything, show me where it is not equal to 0. So that's just the default that gets put into there. If I wanted to say, show me where V is equal to, what was the one we did before, where we need, you put two equal signs in order to get that to work, that logical statement. So there you can see that expression is doing the same thing we did before, but then I can combine this with other functions, and then that's what is specifically being done here, where we're using a modulo function. If you've never used one of these functions before, then we do have a function table within the knowledge base that has all the different functions that are listed. But I can go into, again, I'll just actually copy this. I can go into my statement here, and I can say, actually, I don't know if I copied let me just copy the whole thing. There we go. Actually, I could have used the copy mask functionality, but just to paste this in that particular cell. So the modulo is actually a function that gives us the remainder of division, the remainder after division of a particular value. So here I'm saying for my number column, give me the remainder from division where n is what I'm dividing by. So when I change the value of n, that's why it's changing the number of points that are being shown. And I only want to see that where the value is equal to 0. If you're trying to do something like this and you're not sure if you're using the right expression, we could also do this in a function column. If I wanted to put this in the function column and just see what I would get. Now here again, V is representing, in a general sense, whatever column we're going to be using. So it's showing me the number column is returning, and I would need to specify the number of rows. So I could do this a couple of different ways. If I have my specific, if I had the length of one of my columns as a variable, I could use that. I can also use this trick where I just include T1 as part of the expression, but I'll just have it be a 0. Now I can see exactly what that modulo function is returning and how my points are being shown every time that function is equal to 0. Okay. Great. So, so we've talked about using the logical statements. Let me go back over to the presentation. Again, you can add ranges for your masks. Mathematical operators are included there, and the logical statements gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the different types of things that you can include, and something definitely to play with. Now I already showed you actually quickly, there was one example, that last example had the mask within a group, but I'll show you some more. We have really the masking within a group is an approach that actually I use a lot because it allows you to really see up front what the mask is that you're using. We can apply, just like we can within the mask within a command, we can apply one or more criteria. We can copy the mask between commands and groups. We can copy masks from groups to commands. You can go back and forth between them. We can also nest multiple masks of different types, and that can be a really interesting approach for being able to make more complicated statements. First, I'll just show you a simple example. Let's see, this is one that I think is kind of interesting. This shows me different animals where I have the body versus brain size. I can plot this with points, and I can go ahead and put this on a logarithmic scale in both the X and the Y scale. We'll go ahead and increase the size of these points so hopefully you can see these well. And what you notice here is that I have particular animals that are outside of my range. So if I looked at these, and I can actually go back and forth between my points and my data table. If you've never done this before, I can select a point here and it will go ahead and show me what point this is that I'm seeing. So for example, Triceratops is one of these outliers. And if I go and select another one of these points, I don't even want to pronounce this. Here's another dinosaur, and this last one is another point in my table, Brachiosaurus. These are outliers from my main set of data. Say I wanted to do a regression on this, but I didn't want to include those particular species from my regression, then again, we like this to be very data driven and sort of recommend that approach. It's a good way of dealing with data because it can show me what I'm exactly the logic I'm using to remove particular values without having to show them. Actually, I guess to be maybe a little more specific here, I could make these zeros, and if I want to well, let me do this slightly differently. Say I wanted to create a column of all, starting with all ones. I could use a text column. This is going to be my mask. And if I type this in as 1, and then if I right click on this column and say fill empty rows with previous non-empty rows, then I get all ones. This filling like that just works for the text column, but then I can just convert this to a number column, and all of the ones that I want to exclude, I'll just go ahead and make these a 0. Again, if I lose track of where they are, I can always go back into my graph, and that will, select, again, right click, select point in table. It will point out those rows. And what I want to do is mask out those points, both from my points command as well as from the fit that I'm going to do. And to do this, I'll go ahead and add a group. So I had my command selected, I clicked the group icon. You can also move things in and out of the groups or create a blank group and move things into it. But notice how on this group menu, I have a shared mask option where I could say, I only want to see where mask is equal to 1. And I can go ahead then, and I have this points command. I can use the gear menu to quickly use that in a fit, and I'm going to do this as a power fit since this is a log-log scale. So now I have 2 commands that both have the same mask being used for those commands. And I guess I do like to show this with the regression because that would be so important to show clearly what points are being used and make sure that I have the same mask for both. And then if I wanted to, say, have the other points shown, but not be shown with the same color as the points that were being used within my regression, I could just make a copy of this command. So I'm holding down the option key, there we go, to make a copy of that. Now this one doesn't have the mask, but I could just go ahead and remove any fill color from that. So if you're depending on your familiarity with DataGraph is drawing everything in layers, and it will start with the layer that's on the top. And actually, I guess since this command is just drawing a circle where the points are, I could move it to the top or the bottom, and it actually doesn't necessarily matter. But if I had a fill on this, where I place a white fill within these points, and I moved this command to the bottom, it would be covering all the points. I don't want to do that. I just want to have it shown above. You also could add the opposite mask in here. Again, I can copy a mask from my group. I can paste the mask into this command, and I could say, instead of this being equal to 1, I could say not equal to 1. And now I have a specific command that is only drawing those points that I want to exclude from my regression. Okay. So let's go on to seeing if there's anything I've missed here that I wanted to talk about. We've seen how we can mask every command in a group. Again, groups can also apply one or more criteria. Just to be clear, if I go into my group and I open this up, then there's a plus symbol here where I can add multiple criteria. And the option here is that I can have these criteria either be an and or an or criteria. Here, this is not much option to show, but just so you see that that's how you would set this up. And I can add multiple lines for my masks. And then again, I can nest these one within another. So the example that would be maybe a little more useful for this would be if I'm thinking about the commands that I have here that I'm drawing the population data for these various countries. If I place this within a group, then I could have the mask for the particular country at one level. So I could copy this mask. I can paste it at the group level. Then I might want to just remove it from within the command just to be clear where all the masking was taking place. And if there was another specific country that I wanted to add here, I could go ahead and add that country individually so that I could have, more than one line. This would be I guess I'm really kind of messing up that. I have to think about that a little bit more. So here we have all our countries from A to B. If I wanted to then also nest another mask, I can just nest this group within the group, and I could also then mask, for example, on the continent name. So this is another column that I've set up here. I have a separate table of country codes that have the country code that's mapped to the continent itself. So here you can see the continent, the country code, and the continent. This isn't, maybe I'll hide the main data tables just so you can see this. So this is a separate table that maps the country names to a continent. And then I used that using a mapping column to show the continent name within this table. If you've never done that before, it's very easy. Because the country codes are set up, I've set them up deliberately to have the same name in both tables. You can click the gear menu, say map, and I would say, for example, I've already done continent name. I could say continent code, and then it creates a column here that shows for every country what continent that's in. If I then wanted to use the continent in a mask, I could go ahead and say, instead of include all, I'm going to say I want to include where the continent name is matching Asia, for example. And then I could add another statement, another line where I could say maybe I want to have continent. And another really handy thing, particularly for creating masks, if you're creating multiple lines that have the same, that you're going to select the same column again, then if you hold down the command key and click on that menu and drag it, it will repopulate the menu entry below with that same menu entry. So let me just show you that one more time. I click on this menu, or hold the command key, click the menu. You can see that floating icon, and I drag it and drop it. So I don't have to keep selecting these things over and over again. I can have this match another continent Europe, for example. Europe, there we go. So now I'd only be showing countries that match Asia or Europe. If I do, and I'm not going to see anything because I'm excluding, there's nothing that has both of those. That's an illogical statement. I couldn't have something be both Asia or Europe, so I would want that to be an or statement. So I'd be masking where things are Asia or things are Europe. The other thing that I wanted to just show you is how we talked about masks with variables, but we can combine those to, again, have multiple graphs, use the same criteria, menu options that to quickly create the variables. I showed you some of those, but I also wanted to show you just very quickly an example where we can drive click actions. This is a file that is in the online examples. And here we have a category, we have an X column, we have a Y column, and I have a text set up here on the left-hand side. So notice if I click any of the values that are in or out of the set, then what it's doing is it's changing what's used within this regression. If you open up this group menu, you can see that there's a mask that's shared between the fit command and the points that are being drawn. I also have another points command that's just drawing the points whether they're included or not, but I don't have to limit myself to always having to go over to the global variables to change this selection. This particular command is set up with this click action. You can see there's also a note in the help from this file. And this little icon here that you see is indicating that there's a click action present for this particular graph. If I click on any of these points, if you look both at where I'm clicking, maybe I'll actually make this a bigger size so that you can see this a little bit better. Might as well. So here I have my graphic and my filter on this side with this text set. If I click on C, oops, notice how it's unchecking the C from the actual variable itself. If I click on any of these points, so now I have both A and B checked, A and B are also checked here. So click actions are really sort of an interesting thing to use within the program. And anytime you see this icon that shows you the click action is there, if I click this down, then you can see how the click action is set up. It's set to toggle a selection or the variable selection, and it's changing this category. And the click action is something that you can either disable. I could just take it away completely here using the gear menu. If there's no click action in the points command, then you enable it by using the gear menu. So there's a question. I need to watch the webinar a second time to follow the examples closer. And when will the webinar be available? We have gotten caught up yesterday in terms of posting all the webinars from the prior weeks, and we will try and get this one out as early as possible. Hopefully by Monday. We'll be able to post that on Monday on YouTube. And you're welcome. If there's any other questions, it does look like the chat was very busy, and hopefully everyone got their questions answered if you had any. Our team member is saying make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll post those. We are taking a break next week. We're not going to have a webinar on Friday, but we will have webinars again in September. If you have a suggestion for a topic that you would like to see, then feel free to let us know either on the forum or by emailing us. We did get a couple of messages recently that the creating an account on a forum on Catalina might currently be an issue. If if you're having an issue and you want an account created, we can do that for you. Contact us, but we'll be coming up with a solution for that very soon, because the forum is definitely an important way that we communicate with people. So thanks for your positive feedback, and I guess that for the webinars for September, I'm thinking about delving into some particular topics in a little bit more detail and doing some more step-by-step instructions for specific graphs and how they would be made. So for example, a step-by-step on creating an animated bubble graph to give you something that you could follow along with and work with. And so those are some of the things that we're thinking about. Have a great weekend. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and let me stop sharing my screen. There we go. And that's all we have for today. So again, thank you for joining, and have a nice weekend.